Welcome to Literary Dialogues with Nina Serrano, where poets and writers, wonderful poets and writers, read from their own work and discuss it, supporting peace, justice, and a healthy planet. This is Nina Serrano for La Raza Chronicles. My guests today are three journalists celebrating the 50th anniversary of a bilingual Spanish-English community newspaper, El Tecolote, very beloved in San Francisco in the Mission District and elsewhere. I will welcome them one by one. We'll begin with the founding editor, Juan Gonzales. Welcome, Juan Gonzales. Bienvenido.
Thank you for having me this morning. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And Alexis Terrazas, the current editor-in-chief.
Gracias, Nina, for having me.
A pleasure. And Eva Martinez, a former director of Accion Latina, the publishers of this newspaper, El Tecolote. Happy 50th anniversary.
Thank you so much, Nina, for all your support.
A pleasure. So Juan, let's begin at the beginning. When did it all begin, how, and why?
Well, that's interesting because, I never envisioned that I'd be starting a newspaper at the ripe old age of 23, roughly. And, I thought about starting a paper when I got older, 40 years old, 50 years old, but things were different at that time. The country was in turmoil, a war in Vietnam, civil rights movement, women's rights movement, also a counterculture movement that was happening. So there were a lot of things taking place. And I was fortunate as I graduated from San Francisco State in the spring of 1970, and prior to that, I was in my last semester of fall semester of that year. I was enrolled in a La Raza organizing class. I was part of the La Raza Studies department as a student. And so Jim Queen and Ed and Martinez were the instructors, and they kind of enlightened me about the mission and organizing things were happening. And I got influenced by them in terms of thinking about maybe this thing about a newspaper is not too far off fetch about starting it sooner. And that, since I'd already been thinking about it, I said, well, maybe so. And then lo and behold, as the semester went on in the fall, they decided to approach me about, since they were still building the program, since it had been founded from the San Francisco State student strike. And the whole effort of the strike was to establish ethnic studies, the School of Ethnic Studies, to bring more students of color into the campus, and just to make it more diverse and make the college more responsible to communities of color in San Francisco. So they approached me and said, "Look, we learned from you over the time in the class that you're a journalism student, and that you have some background in journalism. Why don't you think about creating a class, a journalism class in our program in La Raza Studies?" And I said, "Well, I have no clue how to write a class up, first of all, and I'm just finishing up schooling here, and we'll be graduating in spring of 70, and I think you got the wrong person." He said, "No, I think you're the right person. You're passionate about what you're doing, and you have some ideas about the neighborhood. About the neighborhood. You seem to be very encouraged by doing something with the neighborhood. So I think it's something that you could do. Don't worry, just write something up, but we'll tweak it and we'll do whatever we can to put it into the way the college expects a course to be written up." So I said, well, okay. So I did it and I wrote it up, and they tweaked it and submitted it, and the class got approved. It was called La Raza Journalism. It was a course that was going to critically look at media and how it reports on Latinos. And also I was going to turn it into a writing course so that people in the course, especially Latinos, could write stories and maybe we can get them published someplace. And then they, I mean, that's what I was thinking the instructor would do, not necessarily me. And the next thing I know, they said, well, Juan, how about you teaching the course? I said, look, I'm just 22 at that time and I'm just getting my degree. I have no teaching experience. Don't worry about it. We'll help you along. It'll get you, get you to be able to do it. And after their insistence, I said, okay, go ahead and put my name in, not thinking that it would be approved. And lo and behold, I was approved to teach the course. So with that course in place, it clearly meant, I was going to teach a course, teach people to write. And as I was going through the course in the spring of 1970, I had people writing stuff, but we didn't know where to put them in. There was no outlets to get stories printed. And then we had a discussion about starting a paper and this and that. And I said, well, it's funny you should mention that. I've been thinking about that for some years, but I was thinking about doing it later down the road. And they said, well, we can do it now. And I said, well, let's talk about it. So we talked. And before you know, when the semester ended, we said, let's continue having the discussion. Let's have some meetings in the neighborhood, maybe get other people involved. Certainly there were some journalists out there that were working for a publication. I forgot the name of it. Anyway, La Nueva Misión, I believe it was called. And it was not publishing, disbanded because the organization didn't want to do a newspaper anymore. They wanted to provide more social services. So there was some writers there that we tapped. So we had a summer meeting, a couple of summer meetings in 1970, and came out of that meeting was, yes, let's move forward and start a paper. And we came up with the name El Tecolote, but we have no money. They said, well, let's do a fundraiser. What kind of fundraiser? Let's do an amateur talent show. We put on together an amateur talent show of people in the neighborhood, kids and adults, demonstrating their talents. And it raised us $300, and everything was donated by organizations, money and food and whatnot. And $300 in those days was a lot of bucks. And so we figured, well, it was going to cost us $76 to publish a four-page, 5,000 issue newspaper, and we had $300, so that was giving us enough for 4 editions. And so he said, "Wow, we're ready to go." And so by August 24th of 1970, we started the paper El Tecolote, which featured the amateur talent show in the center spread with photographs. We had one of the stories on the front page was about the Chicano moratorium, and we had other stories that related to Latinos and some starting a little bit of neighborhood stories, and so the first issue was launched, and after that it was history. It was just we continued to publish and got more money, got some advertising, and we were noted for doing almost like a benefit a month, whether it was a menudo sale or garage sale or you name it. We were doing it every month and raising monies to continue the paper, and we haven't stopped, and we're still going strong.
That's an amazing story. Amazing. Thank you. I can just imagine at 22, all of those things happening. And I remember them happening. I remember the excitement that there was a community newspaper and that you could write for it. And I did write for it. And the thrill of seeing it translated, that it was a bilingual newspaper. Was that a decision from the beginning to make it bilingual?
Yeah, we really decided that the need for bilingual, because we wanted to make sure that that everyone could read the paper. There are people in the neighborhood that are only monolingual Spanish speakers. And then we didn't want to make it totally Spanish because we also had youth that maybe weren't very versed in Spanish. We wanted them to be able to read the English version of those stories. And anyone who lived in the neighborhood who had, their language was, more dominant English or Spanish, we're going to get the opportunity to read what's happening in the neighborhood and the issues and the culture and the announcements that about events and, nonprofit kinds of activities. We just felt that it was important to be bilingual, and it would expand our audience and give us a chance to actually build a bigger audience than just restricting it to one language. And at that time, we were highly criticized by other Spanish language newspapers in the neighborhood and thought it was silly of us to do bilingual and put English. We should be a Spanish only publication, and because they were, And we just said, no, we had a different vision, and really it's panned out over the years. Being bilingual was actually a plus, and many of the publications that we're publishing shifted to being bilingual as opposed to being only one language. And then a lot of newspapers these days are moving more toward bilingual to, again, to broaden their audience. And they can always, you can always feel that that one language is going to be enough and everyone's going to be able to read it. So it was something that it seemed just natural to do, and we did it, and it actually proved out to be the best decision we could make.
I'm sure it's turned up in many classrooms for just that reason, that it's bilingual and people can compare the English with the Spanish. How did you recruit translators? And how did you financially keep it going? You couldn't do fundraisers every month.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we put a lot of notices in the paper about needing translators, and I had a few friends that were, their first language is Spanish, and they volunteered to do some translating at the beginning, and then we asked them, encouraged them to recruit on our behalf friends that they knew, and they did so, and we began to build a team of people who are translating our stories. And sometimes I went to some of the schools that had Spanish language classes, and see if I can convince the professors to help in translating, or the advanced Spanish classes to actually come forth and give us some folks who can translate the stories. And all of that, those efforts, eventually began, to solidify a strong team of people who would translate consistently and continue on. And then if they were going to leave, they were going to try to recruit others.
How did you create how did you create a financial base so that you didn't have to do a fundraiser every month?
Well, we continued to do fundraising almost every month. And then after a point, some of the fundraisers were actually came out with good amount of monies, and so then maybe we didn't have to do a fundraiser the following month, so that helped to some degree. But we started then incorporating and develop a nonprofit organization, and the nonprofit organization the initial one was called Espina del Norte Incorporated, and that gave us a lot of the impetus to go after monies. People could donate money and get a tax write-off, or go after grants and things of the nature. And we got a few small grants, but we still relied on that. And of course, advertising, we pumped up energies, resources to go after advertising and continue to get monies there. So it was a combination. The history of El Tecolote in terms of our financials, stability was always around diversifying our ways of getting money. We didn't want to totally rely on advertising as the only source, because if an advertiser didn't like what you were publishing and had issues with, they would drop their ad. And now you find yourself, you don't have enough money to publish next time around. So we kind of diversified, and at times I would put in my own money. I was now working and had a full-time job, and I would put in some money as needed to cover a bill here and there. But in time, as we moved on, and the nonprofit organization, which we lost because of not keeping up the paperwork with the feds and the state, and that's things that lessons learned. Something you get into and don't realize there's a lot more work to it. So we lost it, but we resurrected another one shortly thereafter called Accion Latina, and we paid attention to the paperwork and got people dedicated who were going to do that, and our executive directors were really on top of the paperwork to get it in, make sure we don't do that. And that's been a blessing. Now the nonprofit organization is really bringing in monies. After 50 years or so, people realize, hey, you're here for a long time and you have merit and you're worthy. And now we're on the radar when it comes to being funded, Accion Latina, that's going to help El Tecolote and the other projects we have. And one thing we didn't mention, I guess people can donate to the paper through Accion Latina. And in fact, we're doing a 50 to 50 campaign right now of people donating to the paper. And I think that's on the website as well. Other ways that people can help is actually donating financially to the paper directly. And every penny counts, at this stage, so we're now enjoying the fruits of that kind of recognition and being able to get monies that we weren't able to get before. So it's made our job in terms of financial stability a little bit more enriched and better to continue the publishing of the newspaper for 50 more years, we'll say, So anyway, it's been a beautiful thing.
Yes, it's been a beautiful thing. And as I remember thinking over the years of El Tecolote, it's more than a newspaper now. It's a cultural, a multidiscipline cultural organization that's put on music concerts, that's put out poetry books and poetry editions. It's more than a newspaper, more than journalism, that is. It's entered into the arts. It's a full cultural expression of the community.
Well, I think the paper, one of the main elements of the paper is to kind of be a showcase for the culture in our neighborhood, the people's culture in our community. We don't do a whole lot of stories about the celebrities that, get their publicity anyway. But folks like, artists and poets and musicians who, live and work in the neighborhood or just doing their thing, and they're just as good as some of the stars that are out there, so they deserve some attention and some publicity and some notoriety. And we try to do that and focus on what we call the popular culture. That's always been a thing. And as a result, we've gone, over the years, the artists and musicians want to, I guess, feel really good about the paper and strong about the paper. So when we need their help in terms of a fundraiser and we need musicians or artists or whatever the case may be, they will donate their time or they will give us a cut rate in doing that. And part of that, that's how we started the Encuentro del Canto Popular, which really started out as a fundraiser for El Tecolote. And now it's all its own event, that still subsidizes the entire organization, Accion Latina. But for the first two encuentros, they were fundraisers for the paper. And the artists, they volunteered. They came to the concert and did their music and showcased their music. We had a lot of people there. It was packed houses. We gave publicity and to try to get them more notoriety. And so it was kind of a marriage of Tecolote with the artistic community in many ways that really was fruitful for both. And we've always been very thankful for the artistic community, the cultural arts community in the Bay Area in terms of lending support for the paper and making it happen.
Thank you, Juan. And now, Alexis, you are the current editor-in-chief. And in your reign, many changes happened, including a whole technological revolution of how the paper is put out. My grandson Camilo told me that when he first came to Accion Latina to work there, that Alfonso Texador had not yet faced a computer, and that he would walk down the street collecting all the flyers. Then he'd come back to the office and he would Xerox or copy the flyers. And then I don't know how you would photograph them into the newspaper, but that he never touched the computer to do his monthly Calendario.
That was an amazing man right there.
Eventually learned. He started.
Yeah, he did.
Tap by tap, he finally was able to do it. But yeah, I watched him do that, and I said, "My God, what are you doing?" And he told me, and I says, "I think there's a better way to do the more efficient way." So I was kind of showing him, and they eventually became better at it.
Going back to Alfonso, his desk was an archive of events in the mission because all those papers he collected were all on his desk. And I think even that Calendario was amazing because it gave so much free publicity to nonprofits providing services for people, to events, activist events. So even the Calendario was revolutionary.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's all about, providing a service that a lot of time is absent from mainstream media in general. They just don't have the space or the time slots to do that. And we can't give up. That's part of our service to the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. And just want to kind of give credit to all the like Juan and all the founders too, or all the founding writers. You know, they paved the way to make my job easy, really. You know, but yeah, so I've been the editor for 7 years this June, and you're right, a lot has happened. When I became editor, you know, the paper was still like a biweekly, still bilingual, and we still are that today. But the organization has just really grown, and I've always viewed Accion and Teco as like a storytelling organization. You know, there's various ways, whether it's print journalism or art, you know, paseo artístico or
Alexis, could you comment on all that? Like, how did you start?
and I think that lends right into like this technological shift. You know, there are a lot of different ways. There's always been really various ways to tell stories, as you know, Nina. You know, como se dice? We come from a people who it's in our blood to like pass down stories orally, like this oral tradition. So it just seemed really natural for us to kind of also branch into that world, right? You know, so March 1st, we actually launched our podcast, Radio Teco, you know, and so that's been really, really exciting. And that's a weekly show. So in addition to still, and we still have a print edition too, by the way. I think that's something that maybe confuses people, especially during a pandemic. Like, are you still publishing a physical paper? And we are. You know, I've been working remotely for more than a year, right? Obviously, we you know, the shelter in place from last March. So every 2 weeks, I set up shop here in my house, and my kids are really good about it too, where I just lay out the paper here at home, send it to the printer, and it gets printed out. And our AV editor and myself, Monty Rossetti, and some of our other contributors also record podcast episodes. We were up till 11 a.m. or sorry, 11 p.m. last night recording our latest episode. So this shelter.
I can say that these podcasts are wonderful. We've aired them on La Raza Chronicles on KPFA. People
Thank you.
really enjoy them.
I appreciate that. So that's really what it's been. But you know what's really interesting is, even though the technology has changed, the storytelling, the spirit of uplifting, you know, other people's voices, you know, members of our own community and other communities as well, that really hasn't changed. You know, you look through the archive, there is consistency in us uplifting the voices of other communities, you know, and we continue to do that too, via the newspaper and via, you know, whether it's the podcast or some of our other cultural arts programming, you know. So even as technology advances and adapts, it just enhances the way we tell stories. So that's been really exciting.
Yes, and the physical office of El Tecolote has changed too. It now has a beautiful art gallery and an outdoor gathering place that's like an art gallery too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I look at photos of when I first started, and I know Juan and Eva, you guys remember that, the the old facade too. And that was home, right? That was home. But man, I remember when they were constructing it, like we were still producing a paper amid like a construction zone, which was kind of wild. But you know, it just made, I think, just us really more inviting. Like it was always, I always thought of Teco as like a safe space anyway, but now like you have a moment where you can display like really righteous art from various artists. You know, you have a space in the back where you can host pachangas, and we've done that. We've thrown our anniversary barbecues back there. So it really kind of makes it feel you know, much more inviting, you know. And but yeah, we're certainly very, very lucky, and just kind of paying, like, again, homage to the forward thinker, like the forward thinking founders. You know, we're not at risk, as you know, we cover stories of businesses going under, people losing their homes, and we are very fortunate that we're not in that situation. You know, we're here to stay because we have a location.
Yes, and 10,000 issues of every
That's right.
paper.
Every 2 weeks, 10,000 issues.
10,000 issues. That's a lot of readers. Well, thank you, Alexis. And Eva Martinez, you've been part of this from the beginning, and even been the director of Accion Latina, which is the publisher. What are some of your feelings about the paper and its history?
Well, to clarify, I wasn't there at the beginning, but I did meet Juan and Ana out at San Francisco State in the early 70s. And I think that there was a philosophy out there. I like to say that I was a beneficiary of the San Francisco State strike, that Tecolote kind of came out of that. But there was a philosophy out there of us who gathered around Latino issues that we had to serve the community. We were privileged to be able to go to the university, and that we had to take back those skills to the community. And I think that was taught in all the raza classes, in ethnic studies throughout. That was like, take back what you know. And what was different at that time was the university recruited locally. So there were a lot of people from San Francisco, from the Bay Area, who ended up at State and then could go back to their immediate communities and do work there. I think that philosophy of serving the community, of having an unapologetic stance to be an advocate for the community and for other communities of color and disenfranchised communities, has been something that was established in the early days of El Tecolote and is still there to this day.
What do you think the role of bilingualism in the newspaper was?
Well, I think that from my understanding, that early staff made a couple of commitments. One was that it would be bilingual for the reasons that Juan expressed, that in terms of advertising, it wouldn't take advertising from corporations that were doing horrible things in Latin America and all that. But I think the commitment to bilingualism is something that I kind of think we take for granted sometimes, because we not only put out a long-term community-based newspaper, but we do it in 2 languages, and that's hard. It's like laying out 2 newspapers, and it's double the work. But I think that commitment was very important. And I think not only for Latinos who are monolingual Spanish or don't have Spanish skills, but also for the broader community to learn about Latino life and culture in a more intimate level. It's important for others outside the community to read about the issues that are in El Tecolote.
So what are your plans for celebrating this 50th anniversary? I'm sure you've already done a lot of celebrating. I did see a video of one celebration.
Well, I think one of the things we're hoping that as the pandemic finally settles down and we're able to come together, we'd like to plan toward the end of the year, a kind of a gala event, with performances, with a dinner, with maybe even a dance, something with maybe even using some of the time to honor some of the heroes in the mission who are still with us and who have gone. We're trying to think of something that's really a big event, if possible, with hopefully some sponsorships. We have a committee, an honorary committee that's in place that has some high-profile individuals: Carlos Santana, Dolores Huerta, Olga Talamante. I mean, just a string of people that are there. Hector Tobar, and people who are been with us, know of us, and support us. That we have a large committee that we're going to call upon to assist us when those things happen, and in some ways of getting sponsors and whatever the needs may be. But in the interim, we're doing these series of small events that are virtual. Whether I think we're planning on a poetry tribute to 3 of the poets that were part of the mission, part of El Tecolote: Alfonso Texidor, Juan Felipe, and Victor Martinez, who are no longer with us, and they contributed a lot of valuable time and their poetry to the neighborhood paper, and now in fact help us construct a literario, Tecolote literario in the newspaper on different occasions.
Francisco X. Alarcon also.
Yeah. So we're thinking of doing some event like that. Yes, Francisco Alarcon, that's what I meant. And so we're events like that. Some I think we're looking at something about the radio show, maybe on the history of Latinas in Teco, Teco's history with Latinas, and they were in the forefront of the publishing of the newspaper and had a great involvement. So we want to give recognition to the contributions there and the continued contributions of Latinas in the newspaper. We have a rich history in that. So we're a series of events, maybe even a panel with Dr. Latin Rock on the history of Latin Rock and the mission, and maybe even Carlos Santana being part of that panel. Anything we can do virtually, at least for the time being, we're going to try to do as part of the celebrating the continued anniversary of the paper. We've kind of said to ourselves that we would continue to celebrate it through the end of the year, at least in light of the pandemic. So who knows, there may be more things in the horizons, but for the moment, we're making those plans. Yeah, we want to do something because artists have contributed over the years, cartoonists have contributed to the paper. And so we wanted to have a little mini panel that features some of the artists, but also talks about your dad and what he did in his lifetime and maybe show some of his art. So, all right.
That's thrilling. Thank you.
So anyway, that's come up in our discussions of one of the things we would like to do. Hopefully we can do it this year, but it's something that we have in mind. Okay.
Well, that decision to make the anniversary be a year long is another wise decision in this long history. Is there anything in closing that you think we didn't mention that should be mentioned?
I'd like to say something. I think that newspapers like El Tecolote or community-based media outlets play an important role in documenting the history of those communities, the life, the culture. And, you know, I think that when I was working there at Accion Latina, you could go into the file drawers and go back to the 1970s and just open a drawer and see the news. What were the issues? What were people talking about? What were the events that were happening? So that's very important because I feel like Tecolote's archive, no one else has that broad and full of an archive of Latino life and culture. And it's not just the mission, but it was the Bay Area and it was international. I mean, it was Latinx life throughout the Americas that was documented in El Tecolote. So like Lexer said earlier, we need to be our own storytellers. We need to continue that. So I feel like as corporate media has gotten more and more corporate and has moved away from covering these communities, there's still continuing an important role for media outlets, community-based media outlets like El Tecolote to document our history so that 50 years from now, when Lex is sitting in a Tecolote 100-year anniversary interview and saying how his grandchildren are leading El Tecolote, that there will be a history saved. Because, you know, I'm an archivist and I worry about everything going digital and people not saving it properly so that our history is erased.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, Eva, you know, we underwent a you know, this word kept getting thrown around, this reckoning, you know, last year, right? And, you know, whether it was looking at institutional racism in various institutions, museums, education, academia, but also journalism. You know, I've been in mainstream newsrooms before I got my job here at Deco. Like, you know, I remember working in a mainstream San Francisco newsroom and not seeing anybody else that looked like me. You know, and there was too, I remember listening to the narratives that certain editors would put forward. And I think that goes really back to storytelling. I think we have a unique opportunity, and not just at Deco, but other community, you know, media outlets who are run by people of color, by Black people, by Indigenous people, to really kind of push their narratives forward or challenge what we've come to accept as like these mainstream media kind of narratives. So it's just a pleasure to be able to do that and to always like just kind of pay homage to those who came before, you know, because I really feel that the only way we're going to continue to uplift these stories is if not only that we have like more inclusion, but that we could just create our own media, you know, and we're seeing that, you know, and even going back to the issue of bilingual reporting, it's funny when I didn't know you got pushback from certain community members about being bilingual, because now you see like mainstream outlets today here in San Francisco that are like, we need to do bilingual stuff too. And so it's just really cool for us to be on that forefront. But yeah, I can't stress enough, just kind of riffing off of what Eva said. It's empowering to tell your own story and to challenge like the narrative, and enough with other people telling our stories. It's our time to do it. So
Well, it's wonderful that at the 50th anniversary that you are still in the vanguard and leading the way. I wonder how viewers could subscribe to El Tecolote or find the podcasts.
absolutely. So if you visit our website, eltecolote.org, there's a big button on the homepage that says subscribe to the newsletter. So there's that option, and that is free. There is also an option to subscribe for the physical newspaper, and we also take digital payment for that. And in terms of the podcast, basically, if you just type in Radio Teco into whatever platform, wherever you get your podcast, will pop up, on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify. So, and then of course you can listen to Raza Chronicles, who will air some of our episodes occasionally as well.
Yes, and a great pleasure it is. Well, it's been a wonderful, wonderful time being with you all 50 years later. I look forward to another 50 years of publication, even when I'm no longer able to be a reader. Knowing that we go forward, our community, our stories go forward to the future. And I think what you said about storytelling is why El Tecolote feels like such a friendly paper, because it's full of stories like people wanting to share rather than propaganda that we get from the mainstream media. So it's been a pleasure, and I thank you all. Juan Gonzales, the founder of El Tecolote, Alexis Terrazas, the current editor-in-chief,
This is Nina.
and Eva Martinez, the former director of Accion Latina. Okay, that's a wrap.
Thank you for that. It was fun.
That was
That
good.
was fun. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.